They'll blanket you in Wi-Fi and profit off the radiation. Congregation collecting the people for that Satan. I keeps it blazing, cause I can read between the lines. I ain't blind, we unwind what they're really saying. Genetically modify what you're tasting. Don't need that cottage promise, so now you live up in your mom's basement. Redesign time so your mind is always wasted. Program to crave the basics. Keep the beta in stasis. Pay the state, kid. You're in debt for being born. Messengers are mourn, just the price for being warned. Don't be alarmed, disconnect from their machinations. Stop subscribing to the folly of own nations. Bone breaking ain't the answer, cause they seek the ownership of souls. Spread the seeds and watch them grow. Break the chains of control. Break the chains of control.
Sweet eternal balance of all that is good, true, and beautiful, friends. Rogueways is pleased as punch tonight to welcome a historian, a theologian, a philosopher, a star myth map cartographer, and healer of humanity through the telling of the stories of the stars. These stories needed telling and have found their channeler in the likes of author and all-around badass David Mathisen. David, it's so exciting to have you here, ready to talk today about everybody's favorite topic, which is the stars and their universal truths. And so thank you so much for being here with us.
Yeah. Thank you, Lindsay. It sounds like somebody has graduated from the Greg Carlwood School of Poetry, but bringing her own, poetic angle from her own poetic style. So thanks for that intro and for inviting me over. I'm really looking forward to talking with you.
Well, thank you. I definitely was originally inspired by Greg's hearty welcome, so I love hearing that. That's very nice. And I do want to shout out to anybody listening. Just a few reminders. Tomorrow is the last day to get a discounted price for the One Day of Brightness event. After that, the early bird special is over. We've just got a few weeks left before that event starts. It's uplifting. It's enlightening. People get way more out of it than they ever expected. And so I hope to see you all there the day before the summer solstice this time. And if you like those endings of every episode of Rogue Ways that I sort of channel for each episode, then I have collected many of them and tweaked them a bit to become an inspirational sort of oracle God shot book called All Endings Are Beginnings. You can get it on rogueways.org or from Amazon, wherever you please. And now, David, the pointless question of the episode for you that I was going to ask you is that bats have gotten a pretty bad rap this year, and I'm wondering if you like bats or hate bats or have something that you that gives you reason to think about them, or what are your thoughts on bats?
Bats?
Bats.
Oh, bats.
The echolocation masters.
I think bats are really amazing. I love bats. This whole Wuhan lab. If you want to go down that rabbit hole, you should listen to Dave Emery, Emory, Dave Emery, who's been, I think he's up to episode number 1,100 and 1,400. I don't know. He's been on the air for 40 years. And he talks about the full court press on China and how, it's very similar to the assassination of President Kennedy. For people who didn't want to buy the official story, there was a kind of a sub-conspiracy theory that was a limited hangout. It was not the real, it wasn't what really happened. That was, Lee Harvey Oswald was in league with the communists, and then, he was working for the KGB and he shot Kennedy, and then another one they rolled out was, well, the mob did the whole thing, and look, the mob couldn't have thrown the Warren Commission, right?
True.
Chief Justice Warren, the mob was controlling that whole thing. Obviously, it was, and the KGB was controlling the whole Warren Commission, really.
Yeah.
So it's like a little limited hangout or whatever you want to call it. The virus was made in a lab, and it was a Chinese lab. No, that's probably not what really happened.
Right.
It may have been made in a lab, but there's been a full court press on China that was going long before the story of, bats in the wet market. Anyway, I love bats. To get back to your original question, I lived in Texas for a while. I was stationed at Fort Hood, and they have these amazing bats that come flying out in Austin, Texas, over the river. But actually, where I live now in Paso Robles, San Luis Obispo area of California, Central Coast of California, we have bats in the summer. So I love seeing bats when I'm out walking at night, looking at the stars, and the way the bats fly is just amazing. But if you would listen to Dave Emery, it's very frightening when he talks about bats basically deal with viruses very differently than humans. So they can actually kind of shut down the cells around the virus and make it go to sleep.
Wow.
And that's their defense mechanism. So when a virus that has kind of evolved in the virus fashion to exist inside of bats gets dropped inside of humans, humans can have this cytokine storm where they overreact, where our immune system overreacts, because we don't deal with it that way. We deal with like sending out the Spartans, from 300, and they go attack the virus, and that might not be the best way to deal with a bat virus. So there's been bioweapon research on bat viruses for a long time, long before 2019. Anyway,
it's almost like they're giving us
great random question.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for your great random answer. It's almost like they're telling us, where this did actually come from was from, research on bat virology and like trying to transfer that over to humans or something. Who knows?
Yeah, it's a fraught question. We're already going down pathways that I didn't know we were going to go down.
Yeah,
but,
we don't have to go down them at all. But I do love bats in general, and I love that they're pollinators, and I love that, like you were talking about, when they're flying across the night sky, it's like you're just seeing their silhouette really, and against like the background of the stars. And I also love,
it's crazy how they maneuver. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I also love how they eat bugs, because I really dislike most bugs, and I love that bats eat just thousands of them. So every time I see a bat, I'm happy.
Yeah, bats get a bad rap. But to tie it to the stars, actually, when Odysseus in the Odyssey gets spit out by Charybdis, when he's sailing through Scylla and Charybdis, or Scylla and Charybdis, however the right way to pronounce it is.
Just like the chaotic ocean, like, is trying to suck him down. Okay.
Right. So he has to choose between the monster with many heads that grabs sailors off the deck of the ship and eats them, or the whirlpool that will devour the whole ship. He has to sail in between Scylla and Charybdis, and it's like a dilemma. Choose one or the other. I've heard you actually say, anytime somebody's giving you this dilemma, they're probably setting you up for a fall, right? Well, anyway, Odysseus has to sail between Scylla and Charybdis, and he actually kind of veers a little towards Scylla, and 6 of his sailors get plucked off the deck by her horrendous serpentine heads. But then basically he gets sucked down into the whirlpool anyway, and he gets spit back out, and he grabs onto this little craggy kind of rocky, not a mountain, but like, a rock sticking up in the ocean with a fig tree on top. And he grabs onto the fig tree, which fig trees are throughout ancient myth. The Buddha meditates under a fig tree. There's fig trees in the Old Testament and the New Testament. Anyway, he clings like a bat. I love that imagery. In the Odyssey, they use all kinds of metaphors for Odysseus. He's like an octopus at one point. He's like a bat at another point. So yeah, I love bats too.
Yeah.
Cool question.
Well, that's a really cool image to think of him too, like huddled up like that, like a bat just sort of wraps in on itself, like for dear life.
Yeah. And there's a constellation that looks like a bat. I would argue that is pointing us towards a specific constellation that is Aquila the eagle, or Aquila. Some people pronounce it different ways, but it's an eagle, but when you see it in the night sky, it looks like a manta ray or even a bat when you see it in the night sky. So anyway.
Interesting. And if it were a bat, would it represent something slightly different than the eagle? Or what do you think? Is that intentional obfuscation?
Yeah, it's interesting that all these constellations play many different roles. It's kind of like actors and actresses, or I guess we just say actors now, but actors will play different roles in different movies and be wearing a totally different costume, and even sometimes take on a different accent. They'll they'll take on a totally different accent, and it may even take you a little while when you're watching the movie, and then you're like, wait, I know her. She was in such and such, or oh, that guy played, Mr. Poe in Series of Unfortunate Events, and now he's playing Churchill, and totally different, but it's the same actor. So the constellations will do that, and sometimes they'll be kind of have a negative connotation. Sometimes they'll have a positive connotation, which is really interesting.
Yeah.
But it's like there's a limited number of constellations, and there's a limited number of kind of famous actors, and so they play these roles. They'll put on different costumes almost in the myths. But we can get into that. Yeah, we can get into that.
They're like repurposing them for whatever we need them to be.
Yeah, it's like a huge metaphor, and you can just grab, it's a really amazing, profound system. We can talk about it. But well, actually, I'm interested, since you asked me a question about bats, how you discovered or came across my work.
I believe that I saw it in the Grimerica chat. Okay. Maybe you had done some work with them. Yeah, I'm sure that it's also very possible that I've heard you on various shows over the years, but I don't have a memory for names. And so, once I started doing my own show, then I just find people who I kind of gravitate towards and who sound really fascinating and ask them nicely to come on my show. And I'm very lucky when they say yes. So,
oh, well, thank you. Yeah. Well, how could I not say no when you said you'd be pleased as punch?
Pleased as punch.
I will definitely go on if someone says they'd be pleased as punch.
Now people know the secret.
It only works one time.
Yeah, that was it.
But yeah, thanks for inviting me on, and I'm glad you found it interesting enough. And I've definitely been on Grimerica many times and done a few in-person events with the team from Grimerica, and teaming up with the Brothers of the Serpent podcast team. We've done a couple of events just in the last couple months that have been really special.
I think that's actually what it was. They think they were sharing some pictures from that or talking about that. And then I went and looked at your site, and what I really liked is it wasn't just astrotheology. And I mean, not that I should ever be able to say just astrotheology, because that's the biggest topic of all of history. But it wasn't just that, but it was also a lot of the ways that you've couched it were very fascinating to me. And I especially want to talk to you about the healing of trauma through the stars, because that's really fascinating too. But I also was curious to know, is this something you were always headed towards? Like when you were a kid, were you looking up at the night sky just fascinated and that never ended, or what happened?
Great question. I was not connecting the stars to the myths as a kid, but as long as I can remember, I've loved the myths for sure. I've got them around here. Yeah, I had these books, these actual books when I was little. This is Norse Gods and Giants by the Dolairs. This is Ingrid and Edgar Perrin Dolair. It's really awesome. This was published in '67. Norse Gods and Giants. Look at that.
How cool.
That's beautiful. There's the names. Hopefully I'm saying their names right. Ingrid and Edgar Perrin Dolair. And then, I've had that book since I can't remember how young I was. In the Greek myths, this is also by the Dolair. So if you have children any ages under like 38, you should get these books for your kids. And so I always loved the myths. I always loved the Odyssey. Even when I was little, I had a book by a scholar named Moses Finley, or he goes by his initials a lot of times, M.I. Finley, called The World of Odysseus, which I read a million times. And I also loved going out and looking at the stars. My dad would take me out to look at the stars, and I had the books by H.A. Rey. I've mentioned them on a lot of podcasts. I don't know if you've heard me talk about how important the outline system that the famous author H.A. Rey wrote this book in 1952 called The Stars, A New Way to See Them. I could reach around and pull that out too, probably. But I won't, because I don't see it right away. But The Stars, A New Way to See Them. I had that book since, before I could remember. I don't remember not having it. And my dad would take me out to look at the stars. And so I always loved the myths and the stars, but I did not see a connection between the myths and the stars until much later. In fact, I became a hardcore literalist Christian while I was in the Army. I was reading the Bible very diligently and for a lot of years. And there's a lot of truth and beauty in the Bible. I always, make a point of saying that. But it's being inverted by literalist misinterpretation. So anyway, when I got out of the Army, I got this book as a gift for my mother. My mom and dad were going to Machu Picchu, and I got a book called Heaven's Mirror by Graham Hancock and his wife Santa Faya. It's a beautiful book. It's like a glossy kind of full-size photographs of Machu Picchu and these other ancient sites. And I was looking for something that had something to do with Machu Picchu for my parents. And I was like, man, I'm going to look into this Graham Hancock. Who, what else does he have? And I looked up some of his YouTube videos, and this was around 2008, I think. Anyway, so I got some of his other books, like Fingerprints of the Gods, and he mentions this book, Hamlet's Mill.
Yeah.
And I've talked about this a lot, in other podcasts, but, since you asked. So I was not looking for this. I was believing the Bible literally. But Hamlet's Mill, published in 1969 by these two professors, Herta von Deckend and Giorgio de Santillana. And they talk about precession and the precession of the equinoxes. And there's this ancient system that appears to be worldwide that is connecting all kinds of different subjects that we don't think are connected anymore. Myth, but also number, but also music, but also time, but also poetry, but also the stars. And I was like, what? Stars, myths, connected? And I was just, I became obsessed a little bit, like the guy with the, in the movies with the string, in the shed in the backyard with all the string. Like I had to figure out the connections because they saw that there was something going on, but they didn't really. If you read Hamlet's Mill, it's a little frustrating because they didn't really figure out the vocabulary. They just said, look, there's something here that's worldwide, this ancient worldwide ruin. How it fit together, they were kind of grasping. And I became really obsessed with it. But I was very, very open to the idea that all the myths, Greek myths, myths of ancient Egypt, myths of ancient India, myths from the Americas, myths from the cultures of the Pacific were based on the stars. I was not at all okay with the idea that the Bible stories were based on the stars. So, but they have, in a few places in that book, they talk about a few Bible stories. And I was like, I know the Bible pretty well. Those are actually pretty good arguments. And as I started to dig in, it's like, you realize if you know the Bible pretty well, and you know the stars pretty well, and you start to investigate that line of argument, you will see that the stories of the Bible and the characters in the Bible from Genesis all the way through to Revelation are based on the stars. And I'll show you a few. I put together a few slides to show people what I'm talking about. But so that's a long answer to your question. That I was absolutely not looking for proof that the Bible stories are all based on the stars, because then so I wrote a book in 2011 where I was talking about connections between the myths and the stars, but I was still taking the Bible literally. And then between 2012 and 2014, I really had to wrestle with, I was finding more and more and more evidence and decoding some of what I like to call the vocabulary of some of the stories that maybe Hamlet's Mill didn't quite decode, but I was like, oh, well, the locusts, they must match up with this constellation, or this must match up with this. And I really had to basically make a decision to either like close my eyes and continue believing the Bible literally, or say, my whole foundation is wrong. And that's what I did. I had to change. And it's like a whole paradigm shift, because it colors a lot of how you think about politics and everything else, or what's going on, like what you allow yourself to see. So
yeah, it was like that unveiling led to even further unveilings because you were brave enough.
Sure.
You were brave enough to do it. Like you said, that was your whole foundation, your whole paradigm shift.
Well, and I understand people whose whole identity, they have grasped onto something. We're all trying to figure out this very complex world that we're in, really this very complex individual self that we are, right? I talk about the myths having layer after layer after layer. They just keep going down. They're endless. You can just keep peeling back layers. Guess what? Why is that? Because you, listener, are like that. That's what it is. It's about you, and you have these layers. And basically, once you peel off one layer, you'll never get to the bottom. It's a bottomless depths that you can dive. And the myths are about you. And as you alluded to, this story of trauma is actually very ancient, and healing of trauma, I am convinced that is a central theme of the myths. They're about a lot of different things. They are talking about the human body. There are metaphors in there about, the human body and the breathing and raising of consciousness, and that's definitely in there. They are talking about all kinds of profound things, but for sure a central aspect of these myths is the recovery of this alienation that we have from actually self, from self. That's a very central theme in all of the world's myths. So we can get into that.
Yeah, I think that was part of what really fascinated me the most, that I wanted to talk to you about the most, because it connects to so many different aspects, and a lot of the very religions and traditions that, you're finding have this astrotheological sort of basis. They all have that same sort of message too when you get to the core of them, which is, in so many ways you can find all these masters from all these different traditions saying essentially the same thing, which is, if you can heal all of yourself, then you can heal all of the world. And this trauma you're talking about, I wonder if there is actually like something that happened way back when, and there's like the original trauma, like almost like the original sin or something. Or if you have any thoughts of that, or if I'm just jumping way too far ahead.
Well, that's actually what I prepared some slides, so
Perfect.
we're like on the right wavelength.
Nice.
But it's interesting that you say that. So I was just on a great tour of the channeled scablands in Washington, where there's this catastrophic geology, and with Randall Carlson and the Brothers of the Serpent team and the Grimerica team, and Graham from Grimerica couldn't make it, but Darren was there. But we were looking at evidence of mega floods and like the remains of waterfalls that were 10 times bigger than Niagara Falls. And it's a catastrophe that happened on our planet. When, I don't know for a fact, but there's the Younger Dryas impact theory and the timeline, that Graham Hancock and Randall Carlson have talked a lot about. And Graham Hancock talks about humanity being a species with amnesia. And on that trip, I was thinking to myself, it might even be more accurate to say a species with trauma-induced amnesia. Like there was an event that destroyed what we knew before, and we've forgotten, because the fact of myths around the world being all based on a common system of celestial metaphor, and I'm talking about myths from the earliest texts that we have today, the Gilgamesh and other ancient Mesopotamian texts, the pyramid texts of ancient Egypt, the ancient Sanskrit texts of India, the ancient myths of China, ancient China, these very ancient cultures that conventional academia would say, well, these are kind of the first civilizations in the conventional timeline. They're already using this system, and they're already using their own kind of variants on it. So it's hard to say, well, the Egyptians sailed around and gave it to everybody else, because everybody else has already gotten like a version that they've evolved to themselves. So it comes from something even more ancient. It's just like all this archaeological evidence, this amazing, Ollantaytambo in Central America, and some of the pyramids of Central America that have the same types of processional numbers encoded into their proportions that the pyramids of ancient Egypt have. So we've got archaeological evidence around the world that shows there's something more going on than our conventional timeline. And there's artifacts in ancient Egypt that are that have precision, and they look like they were made with power tools. And if you watch Ben from Uncharted X, he was on this trip, and it was fantastic to get to talk to him. But he has some videos that show it's very likely that the dynastic Egyptians, dynastic or dynasty, California, I say dynasty, but anyway,
Yeah.
those artifacts almost certainly predate the dynastic Egyptians.
Wow.
They're from some even more ancient, now forgotten civilization. So we've got these physical artifacts that point to that. And we also have this system of myth that's really undeniable. It is as powerful of a body of evidence as all the physical evidence. The fact that all these myths around the world are based on this common worldwide system it's really impossible to explain with the conventional timeline of human history. It's impossible to explain it
Absolutely.
without changing the whole story.
And I get that is part of what makes people resist looking at some of this and coming to grips with some of it. But I wonder too if it connects back to that idea of trauma, or this ancestral trauma or ancient trauma that we maybe all have kind of somewhere inside of us, that some people are still, even more than wanting to not change their paradigm in this current life, wanting to like avoid dealing with whatever that was. Because they're just, if you bring up some of this stuff to some people, they're like angry and they're like upset. And like, do you really need to be angry about wondering how old things are? Is it really angering to you? Like, what is this that's happening with you emotionally? And maybe it connects back to that trauma.
For sure, because that is a defense part. So recently, I've become much more fascinated with these cutting edge psychologists who are talking about trauma.
Yeah.
And, as I've mentioned many times, I went to the military academy at West Point. And while I was there, talk about, use of trauma
Yeah.
to train you. But, it was I made wonderful friends there, but for sure they use unpleasant training techniques at times, yelling at you, like real mental abuse. Back when I was there was like serious, I'm laughing because that's a defense mechanism.
Yeah.
But anyway, but I kind of poo-pooed psychology. We had to take psychology, but I was like, nah, psychology, blah, 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 which was another defense mechanism. Like, I don't want to dig down into that. So we had to take a full year of psychology, and some of my good friends decided to major in it, but I was like, I have no use for that. Of course, because I knew everything when I was 19 and 20 years old, right?
Oh, we all do, yeah.
I knew everything. Now I'm like, oh my goodness, psychology is everything,
Yeah.
or it's profoundly important. And so these cutting edge psychologists like Dr. Gabor Mate, Dr. Peter Levine, Dr. Richard Schwartz, just to name three that have really influenced me in the past couple of years, talk about trauma as a separation from the self. Dr. Peter Levine, I think, was one of the first ones to really deal with it. Starting in the 70s, he was really dealing with a lot of the post-traumatic issues that were coming out from the Vietnam War, with people who had been, mostly men, but some women too, who had been in Vietnam and had post-traumatic stress. But really the whole culture was being traumatized during those years. There were the assassination of John F. Kennedy, the assassination of his brother 5 years later, Robert F. Kennedy.
Kent State,
assassination of Martin Luther King, assassination of Malcolm X, assassination of Fred Hampton.
Yeah.
So it was deliberate trauma being inflicted on the society, Watergate. So in the 70s, Peter Levine started talking about that, and he wrote a book where there's a quotation, I don't remember it word for word right now, but he says basically trauma is the most overlooked, misunderstood, ignored cause of human suffering. 5 other adjectives that I can't remember off the top of my head, but it is the most overlooked cause of human suffering. Well, that's a pretty powerful statement if it's true. And I happen to believe he's probably correct. So why do people get angry when you bring up the idea that maybe what happened on September 11th might not be what the media and the organs of the, the official report have said, because it is profoundly threatening to your whole sense of the world. And there's defensive like programs or algorithms. And so Dr. Richard Schwartz is a doctor who is a psychologist who has come up over the years. He has perceived that we actually all have multiple personalities. We actually all have parts. And you say, well, that part of me or this part of me, and there are protector parts there are parts of us. We're all given these parts of our personality and they're all wonderful, but they get forced into these roles because of trauma to protect the system. And sometimes they're playing a role they don't really like, but hey, I've got to protect against that idea. That idea is too dangerous. And if they can't protect it one way, like with calm, argument, they'll protect it another way, like with drinking, going on a giant binge, or throwing a giant, anger explosion or whatever.
Yeah.
And I guarantee you, I've seen all this in myself. Like Richard Schwartz's internal family systems therapy is true, and I'm convinced the ancient myths are talking about this. They're talking about this, that we have these aspects, these parts of ourselves that show up, and it's because of what some modern psychologists are calling trauma. And by trauma, they mean an actual separation from self and suppression of self. So we're getting kind of far afield into some hopefully the listeners are interested in this, but I would maybe, before we go too far, bring it back to, you were talking about, you mentioned, I think, the fall, or the original trauma.
The original trauma.
Or it's very clear that the stories in the Bible are talking about trauma, because they start off with the story of the Garden of Eden, which is all about separation,
right?
Including separation from yourself, which I'll show you. So I can show you that it's all based on the stars. It's not literal, it's celestial, but it's metaphorical, and it's talking about each and every one of us. It's not talking about some, man and woman in a garden 6,000 years ago, or however long people think it was.
It's like talking about us right here, right now, and maybe even the collective us all throughout time. Yeah, and even if you think about...
I think... Go ahead.
Even if you think about the concept of Eden, it's like yourself before you were, when you were innocent, and when you just, nothing had yet harmed you, or like come into your little ball of everything is perfect, where we all kind of started, at least somewhat, in this life. That's a great point, Lindsay, because another ancient myth that I really love is the Epic of Gilgamesh. And in the Epic of Gilgamesh, we have, I don't know how familiar you are with it, but Gilgamesh, who's 2/3 divine, but he's got some issues. He's got some problems. And the people, he's like the king of Uruk, but the people are like, hey, this guy, we got to do something about this guy. And they pray to the gods, and they're like, this king, he won't leave the people alone.
he won't leave any of the young women alone. We got to like defuse this guy's issues somehow. And the gods say, well, I know what we'll do. We'll make a twin. We'll make Enkidu, and we'll send him down, and he'll be almost exactly like Gilgamesh, but different. He'll be covered with hair, and he'll live in the woods, and they create Enkidu, and they put him in the woods, and he lives among the beasts of the field, and he's their friend. He runs along with them. He drinks with them at the watering hole, and they're not afraid of him. It's like this perfect state of innocence, connection with nature. And then what happens? He has a falling from his perfect state, like you were saying. It's the same kind of pattern that you just described. He's letting all the animals go when the hunters try and snare them in their various traps, because he's the friend of the animals. And the young son of the hunter sees Enkidu at the watering hole, and he says, aha, I know who's been setting our animals free. And he goes and tells his dad, the old wise hunter. And he says, Dad, I saw he was frightening. This man, he was drinking along with the antelopes at the watering hole. But I know that's who's been setting all the, animals free from the snares. But I didn't know what to do. I mean, he was powerful looking. He was, and the dad says, well, I know what to do. We'll get a beautiful woman to seduce him. That's what we'll do.
That always works.
That always works. And they get Shamhat. She's a temple prostitute. So she's like a sacred function in the temple. And they say, listen, you need to go out to the watering hole and seduce this wild man. She says, okay. And she does. And they sleep together like for 8 nights in a row or something without stopping, kind of.
Wow.
If you can read it, you can read the text in ancient Mesopotamia and see what you think it is saying. But anyway, as soon as they're done, they're like, wow, that was great. And Enkidu's like, yeah. But he tries and runs with the antelopes, and he's like, I can't keep up with them anymore. What's happened? And they're running away from me, and they're afraid of me now. He's been entangled up with society. Now he's tangled in with human conventions and all the aspects of being part of. Now he's been roped into society,
he's
basically.
Like tamed.
Yeah, he's been tamed. He's been split from nature. And that happens in the Garden of Eden as well, which, I can show you that the Gilgamesh story is based on the stars. I've got a whole couple of chapters about that in my book, The Ancient Worldwide System, which was 2019. I didn't prepare some slides on that. I prepared some Garden of Eden slides. So, but it's a central theme.
Yeah.
It's a central theme. And this theme of twins, by the way, we can come back to that too, because I am convinced that Gilgamesh and Enkidu are not 2 different people.
Yeah.
You see, these 2 twins that we find over and over in the myths, it's twins. It's not talking about 2 different people. That's talking about you. You're split from yourself.
It's like your
splitting.
Conscious self and your shadow self, or your subconscious self almost.
Yes. Your unconscious self that knows so much, but your egoic mind that has to function in society. It's like when you were 1, you didn't have this web of kind of social microchip traces traced onto your brain.
Yeah.
But over time your parents started to impart some don't touch that, don't do that, don't say that. And as you started to interact with other kids in preschool or kindergarten or wherever, you started to learn other things. Oh, if I say this, I get made fun of. Oh, if I say this, I get beat up. Oh, if I say this, I get called, certain names. Okay. And then you start to suppress those things, and you start to, this like matrix gets put down on top of who you are. And then that filters out knowledge that your deep self actually has. So you can see something you can see Building 7 come down at free fall speed, or at a speed that's indistinguishable from free fall. And you know in your gut that did not come down because of office fires of paper inside of filing cabinets,
Yeah.
but there's a part of your brain that says that information uh, I better filter out because it is very dangerous to go there, or I will get ostracized if I go there.
Yeah.
So,
Whereas if
so
we
that's
were
what I think these myths are showing. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I think that's awesome. It's just like if we were still in that sort of baby mindset where we're like not even aware that anyone might care. You know, like you watch a baby and they're just like rolling on the floor and they're like making faces like they have no concept of trying to be anything other than what they are. And if we could just keep in touch with that somehow, keep up with the antelope, you know? Have both at
Right.
once,
That's a
maybe. I don't
great way
know.
of saying it. Keep up with the antelope.
Yeah.
You know, I'm not saying that it's bad to get all those. Um, we are social, made to be social. We're not supposed to be just loners on, you know, the self-sustaining, you know, farm out, you know, all by ourselves, no society. I am pretty sure that humans are very, very social, and we need to, you know, the things that we learn as a child and growing up are important, and all those kinds of like doubts, like did I leave the stove on? I use that example a lot. Like I've driven down the road and I'm like, wait a minute, I'm going on vacation. Did I turn this? I made scrambled eggs. Did I turn the stove off? Turn around and go back, you know, 5 minutes to your house, and you go back in and you, oh, I did turn the stove off, but I didn't remember turning it off. So it was good that I checked. That's actually not a bad, you know, framework. It's not bad to have critical thinking. Even doubts are not bad, but they can run away with us, or they can inhibit and they can create self-sabotage. So there has to be like the right balance. And what happens is those programmings get way out of balance and they suppress actual self, and they won't let self come out. They're like, no, self, you stay down there. We've got everything under control, but actually you are inhibiting. So there has to be a correct relationship. And the correct relationship is for all those players on the team to acknowledge the coach, which is yourself, your higher self, or your Atman. These different ancient traditions have different names for this concept, but that the right relationship is all those functions are actually good and necessary, but they've got to be in their place. They're not running the team. It's like if I've got a bunch of players I use the basketball team metaphor. If I got a bunch of players and they're great, you know, this player is a great dribbler and that player is a great shooter and that player is a great rebounder, but they're not the coach. And if they're trying to be the coach, that team is not going to be, if they're not listening to the coach, they've locked the coach in the locker room, or they've locked him underneath the court. They've locked him in a chamber down in the basement, and they're trying to say what should happen. And they're all arguing with each other. It's going to be a disaster. Even if they're great, talented, what you need is them to trust in the coach like that we all wish we had, that totally understands, I understand this player has this kind of a hang up, but I also know how to get the best out of him or her. And I understand that this player has this kind of, and that great coach that, you know, you sometimes see in a movie or something, that, or, you know, there's real life coaches like this. Like I think of Phil Jackson with the Chicago Bulls when he had Michael Jordan and Dennis Rodman and Scottie, and he had to balance all these players, and they all had their own unique skills, but their own definite like issues. But he was so confident, he knew how much but they were confident in him to let him be the coach. But the situation that we're in is like the players have locked the coach in the basement. That's what the myths are depicting. If we've suppressed who we really are. So all those players are necessary to win.
Yeah.
Phil Jackson couldn't win without Michael Jordan, Scottie Pippen, Dennis Rodman, all those players. They're necessary. All those parts of you are necessary. All those aspects, even the doubting ones, or the one that's like, hey, did you turn off the stove? But if they're running the show, it's going to be a shit show. But if you have that right relationship, that's what we're all actually looking for. That's what we all really hunger for. And that's what the myths, I'm convinced they're talking about that.
Yeah. I love this idea, you know, it's like all of our archetypes are inside of us, you know, and if you're going to cut out one and separate from it, like that's a response to trauma or a form of trauma, right? And you know, you cut out your doubting self, well, now you're going to burn your house down because you never are going to have that come up, right? So you need, like you said, all of them, but you also have to balance them all and also have like that control center, because it's also like if you let the doubt be the only, like the main star, well, now you're just living in anxiety, and like that's going to cripple you as well.
That's right.
Have
That's
this
right.
balance.
And Dr. Schwartz, who started this system of therapy or paradigm of looking at the world called IFS, internal family systems, talks about exiles, where there's a part that's been basically given a burden, like it's carrying in a backpack some ancient trauma from when you were 3 or 2, and none of the other parts want that part around. They're like, get him out of here, or get her out of here. I do not want that backpack full of whatever pain it was that I experienced showing up. And so there will be manager parts that try and please other people to avoid triggering that exile. We don't want that exile coming out. But if the manager role doesn't completely do it, and that exile shows up carrying that backpack full of trauma, the manager part didn't work. A firefighter will come rushing in and go, whoa, hold on, and will do almost anything to bury that, to push that exile back, whether that is, you know, some kind of an addiction, or some kind of explosive rage, or some kind of even self-harm. So those kinds of they call those firefighters in that system, and they often go together. Like the person who's really trying to please everybody, that's a manager part that's trying to please everybody, but they have this like enormous rage that's like right under the surface. It's like, wait, where did that come from? Well, they're working together because of this trauma. Anyway,
yeah.
I don't know where we were exactly going with that, but the myths reflect all of this is depicted in the myths, and the split is depicted in the myths, just like I was talking about Gilgamesh and Enkidu, and we'll see it also in the Garden of Eden.
Yeah.
And the recovery is also, the way to recovery is depicted in the myths over and over. They show it. I actually think the myths are very positive.
Yeah, I love that the answer, the you know, the healing is found within it too, because if we looked up at the sky, the night sky, and we started projecting all of this out onto it so that we could tell ourselves how to heal ourselves, it's kind of amazing that we like had the cure all along, you know, but we were going about it in this very elaborate way. Or do you think that the stars were sort of created or placed so that they could tell that story, or is it a bit of both?
Yeah, well, I have no idea. The answer is I don't know.
Yeah, who would ever?
This system was created long before the ancient Egyptians, long before the Vedas of ancient India, because the Vedas of ancient India are using this system. The myths of ancient Egypt are using this system. The myths of ancient China and ancient Japan and the Americas, and the myths of Australia, the Aboriginal, indigenous cultures of Australia have the same system in their sacred traditions, and the nations of North America have this system in their traditions. So it is very, very ancient. So anyone who tells you they know where it came from, I would suggest that no one can accurately say they know, because it's from some culture that has been forgotten, probably because of some kind of massive event on this planet. But whoever it was, I use the metaphor of Mr. Miyagi a lot. It's like Mr. Miyagi had to be a master of what he wanted to teach Daniel-san to come up with the metaphors that he came up with. Okay, how am I going to teach this kid? Well, I'm not in Okinawa now, I'm in LA, so I'm going to use wax the car. That's not what my dad used. My dad used a different thing, but here I am in LA in the 1980s. I'm going to use wax on, wax off. I'm going to use paint the fence. But Mr. Miyagi was already a master to reach out. So whoever put this together, I would argue it wasn't, oh, there were these primitive attempts to explain where volcanoes came from and attempts to explain thunder and lightning. And they came up with these myths to explain those things. And then, oh, lo and behold, it just happened to also explain trauma and all these profound things. No, it was somebody understood this very, very, like at a master level and gave it to humanity. Just like Mr. Miyagi gave Daniel-san these metaphors that would help Daniel-san learn karate in a deep way that was an esoteric way where he didn't even realize he was learning it. So where did it come from? Were the stars placed in that, order? I don't know. That would, not necessarily, but they sure are amazing how they fit together. I've got a diagram, that shows how I think they're being used, but
yeah,
it's not necessary that they were placed that way. Another metaphor I use is Herman Melville and Moby Dick, right? You had a great episode with someone talking about whales.
Yeah, that was my brother.
Oh, that was your brother?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. That's awesome.
Yeah.
I didn't listen to the whole thing. I just listened to the beginning. I did listen to a few of your podcasts, but
Thank you.
that one was profound. The intelligence and depth of whales. I was, I said before we started recording, I was surfing all day. And
Yeah.
I thought I had better sunblock on. Now I'm all red, but that's okay. But I was surfing a few weeks ago and 2 whales went by and it was like, I couldn't help exclaiming, like, whoa. They were so awesome. I had not seen, I've seen whales from the shore, but I had not seen whales, 25 yards away from sitting on a surfboard with 2 whales going by. They are awesome creatures. But Moby Dick, Herman Melville, a lot of people think, oh, it's all about whaling. Oh, it's all these details of whaling. No, it's not. It's about all these profound things. Predestination. Is there predestination? Is there fate? Can we escape our destiny? All these things. He'll talk about, these intricacies of some aspect of whaling. And you'll think like, why is he going on and on and on? And then at the end, he'll turn the corner and say, but actually, we're all in the whale boat. And this is actually, we can get dragged down to the depths at any moment. And you'd be, oh, that's what he's talking about. So he's using this profound, awe-inspiring, what is the most awe-inspiring thing that we have on Earth? How about the mighty oceans and the deep cetaceans that go down, and they're massive and they're intelligent and they're, all these things that induce awe. And so he wants to grapple with the deepest questions. And so he uses the most profound, ocean, whales to grapple with it. That's what I think is going on with the myths. But instead of using the earthly oceans, they're using the heavenly oceans, the infinite depths of the stars to grapple with these same concepts. Whether the stars were put in those formations just for us, I don't go that far, but it sure seems like they were in some sense. It's a great observation.
It's really fascinating too to think like that's a whole nother level of the way that we are made of star stuff. We're made of the depth of the everything that we can sew metaphorically into that is inside of us too.
That's right. And the myths appear to like understand that because our Milky Way has a galactic core that astronomers today say, well, all the stars, that we know of probably got spit out of this galactic core. Well, that galactic core is the birth canal in the Maya myths. And that galactic core is where Artemis, the goddess Artemis of ancient Greece, is located in my analysis of what's going on, right next to the galactic core, right next to the place where all the birth happens. And Artemis, these ancient hymns talk about Artemis, even though she's a virgin goddess, she is present at the birth, at every birth.
Wow.
So women pray to Artemis when they're in labor to be delivered, because they won't actually be able to deliver the baby until Artemis gives permission. Whoa, well, how is that, how did the myths know that?
How did they know?
Is that just coincidence?
No, that's that mastery.
Like you said, we're all spit out from stars. And some people even think that planets are like burned out stars. Like when a star gets really old, it cools down and contracts into a planet. So maybe we're walking around on an old star. I don't know. And we're all made out of parts of the earth, or, you just go layer after layer after layer.
Yeah, it's all the same at every single level of the hologram. That's pretty
fractal.
Cool. Yeah.
It is like a hologram. Actually, that period I told you about, where I was going from being a literalist to understanding and accepting that all those stories in the Bible are based on the stars. My second book was called The Undying Stars, which is a phrase that you find in ancient Egypt in the Book of the Dead, or the Book of Going Forth by Day, the undying stars. And I talk about like this kind of shamanic, I coined a phrase, shamanic holographic, shamanic and holographic. And holographic because if you cut a little tiny piece of a photograph, all you get is a little, the pixels of the little part that you cut out. But if you cut a little tiny piece of a hologram, you actually have the whole hologram right there. It's fractal. Yeah. Like the whole hologram is included in every single part. And that's the realm that the myths are talking about, appears to be, to use, adjectives to try and describe it, shamanic and holographic. There's something beyond the physical, and it incorporates this kind of holographic fractal nature to it.
Yeah, that's a really good, I love that as adjectives. If you're going to try to put adjectives on it, those are the two that work best.
And some people complain about, shamanic has been an overused term, or has been exploited, or has been cheapened, or has been, appropriated. But what I mean by that is this concept, and we find shamanic cultures around the world.
Yeah.
Right? My father's side of the family comes from Norway, and in far northern Norway, we have people who used drums, and they had shamans. They didn't call them shamans. There's different terms around the world, but it's a shamanic worldview that there is a invisible realm that interpenetrates this realm that we're in, that connects us all in some way, that there are certain things we can't explain. I love, on Grimerica, you mentioned Grimerica, they always talk about synchronicities. Yeah. There are certain things that, people say, well, it's just a weird coincidence. Yeah, but wait a minute. I was thinking of this friend I hadn't talked to in 10 years, and he lives in Texas. And I was just thinking of him, and 2 hours later, the phone rings and it's him.
Yeah.
Well, it was just a coincidence. Yeah, but he hasn't called me in 10 years. And I was,
I haven't thought of him in 10 years.
There are even more powerful ones.
Right.
Yeah, there's even more powerful ones than that. But we've all kind of experienced those kinds of things. And it's like there's some kind of fabric, or some kind of something. In the shamanic worldview, you could argue, and I do argue, that the Bible is shamanic in nature. You have passages in there where in the book of Daniel, it'll say, I was lying on my face for 3 days, connected to the divine realm or something. And you go, well, that's kind of not what we think of.
Yeah.
That's not what we think of the Bible being about. So anyway, I can show you that the Bible is based on the stars. That's maybe probably good to pull up some slides if you're ready.
Yeah, we should probably go into that. And I'll just say right before you do that, I think it's an honor to use the word shamanic. You know, it's not appropriation. This is the word that works best out of all the language you could choose from. So that's
right.
my point of
That's
view
right.
on that.
Well,
For what it's worth.
it's an Altaic word. It's from far northeast, like Siberia. It's actually a word from the cultures up there that were still very much shamanic until the 20th century and still have that. And Darren from Grimerica, who, he talks about, he's First Nations from Canada. They say First Nations, they say Native American more in United States. He says, it's not cultural appropriation, it's cultural appreciation.
Yeah.
It's cultural appreciation. And we're hungry for that, see, because that's what actually this whole system that was given to all the cultures of the world. Every culture had these original instructions. That's a phrase from a great author and scholar and wise man named Peter Kingsley. Wrote this book called In the Dark Places of Wisdom, and he talks about every culture has original instructions. And I am convinced, look, nobody was literalist Christian to start off with.
Yeah.
Right. If you're from, like, my ancestors on one side of the family are from very far northern Europe, they were worshiping in the Norse gods, and they were reading the Norse, or they weren't reading, but they were hearing the Norse myths, and they are talking about, this is the same message all over the world. Western Europe had Druidic and other original traditional sacred traditions that were all smashed down and replaced by this literalist misinterpretation of ancient scriptures. So we're actually very hungry for it. And that's why people, beginning really, not even in the 60s, well before the 1960s, but especially during the 60s, you had a lot of people going over to India and, like the Beatles, going over and getting in tune with the Bhagavad Gita. Why? Because they were realizing the literalist misinterpretation of the Bible is not doing it for me. I am hungry for, you could find it in the Bible if you understood that the Bible is actually telling you the same things that all those other things are telling you, and it's all based on the same system. But that's why people are hungry for the places where it hasn't been basically smashed down and replaced with the literalist misinterpretation that changes it from being internal to being external. If you take it literally, then it becomes something about, oh, Adam and Eve. Well, that was, Eve took the fruit. So, that means that women are, dangerous, or, they're the cause, they're the root of all evil, kind of. That's an externalization of a story that's actually esoteric and metaphorical. But when you make it literal, then it's all about something that has to do with, like, your physical external, like, oh, well, Eve, obviously she's a woman. Okay. Now that means all women are like this, or it turns it inside out.
Yeah.
And it turns it upside down.
That's a really good
upside down
way to describe it too. That helped me a lot, to just put it in those terms of, like, you're externalizing and it's supposed to be internalized. Like, is that simple, really? I mean, it's difficult and it's nuanced, but it's that simple.
Yeah. So I've got some slides. Let me show that. There's actually a quotation. It's towards the end of my slides, but I'll just pull it up now as kind of a lead in. It's a quotation from a scholar named Alvin Boyd Kuhn. And I like him a lot. Let me, can you see my screen?
Yes.
All right, let's just pull this up real quick. I know it's kind of a long quotation, but we'll lead into this. This is Alvin Boyd Kuhn from actually from a lecture he gave in 1936 called The Stable and the Manger. So he's talking about kind of the Bethlehem story. But in this 1936 lecture, Alvin Boyd Kuhn, he lived from, I think, 1880 to 1963, Alvin Boyd Kuhn. And he said, Bible stories are in no sense a record of what happened to a man or a people as historical occurrence. As such, they would have little significance for mankind. He uses He's writing this in 1936, but we could say humanity. They would be the experience of people, not ourselves, and would not bear a relation to our life. But that's not what they are, he says. They are a record under pictorial forms. In other words, it's like a movie, it's like a metaphor of that which is ever occurring as a reality of the present in all lives. They mean nothing as outward events. If you try and turn them into outward events, you're going to take away their real meaning. But they mean everything as picturizations of that which is our living experience at all times. And then this is the part I usually zero in on. This is the part I really love. The actors are not old kings, priests, and warriors, princesses, queens. It's the one actor in every, it's not talking about ancient people.
Yeah.
Solomon or David and Bathsheba. Those aren't the actual who you should focus on. It wasn't some historical person named Bathsheba. The one actor in every portrayal, in every scene, is the human soul. The Bible is the drama of our history here and now, and it is not apprehended in its full force and applicability until every reader discerns himself, and I put in or herself, to be the central figure in it. And by the way, Alvin Boyd Kuhn, in some of his other writings, he makes it very clear that he's talking about both men and women. He wasn't being sexist. This is just the way they wrote it in 1936. The Bible is about the mystery of human life. Instead of relating to the incidents of a remote epoch or epoch in temporal history, it deals with the reality of the living present in the life of every soul on earth. So I love that. I love that passage. So that's a great lead in. So let's talk about Adam and Eve. I got some Adam and Eve. This is a painting from Gustave Courtois, 1923. He died. So I don't know when he painted this, but obviously, he's depicting Adam and Eve, and we also have the serpent over there in the upper left. And I guess Adam and Eve, according to Gustave Courtois, were French. We can tell, just looking at them, Adam and Eve were French.
Yeah.
But they're not literal people. They're not, don't get hung up on the way Adam and Eve are depicted. Oh, by the way, there's something really scandalous in this photo or this painting.
Is it?
They probably wouldn't have shown this in earlier years.
Is it just her butt?
What are we showing that we shouldn't be showing? Good guess. But no, we had all kinds of marble statues with naked men and women. Look at Adam, and they're showing something in the middle of his abs that is very controversial.
Oh, the belly button.
He's got a belly button. Like
he came from a woman.
I'm like, what's up? Adam has a belly button, a navel. That's that's making a statement right there.
It's very taboo.
This is wait a minute. If he was created, there's like whole books and theological treatises written on whether or not Adam had a navel.
Wow.
Because that's fraught question right there. Well, the fact is, it doesn't matter how you depict it, because this is celestial metaphor beyond any doubt, which I will show you. And I've shown this before, but I show lots of different things. I try and show some different, maybe things that I haven't shown as many times before, or recently. So I don't, maybe some listeners haven't heard me talk about, but lately I've been really focused on this story of Adam and Eve, because I just recently did a video about heaven and hell are celestial metaphor. But this threat of hell, actually, when I was driving up to Washington for this event with Randall Carlson and the Brothers of the Serpent and Grimerica and Ben from Uncharted X, I drove past this sign that said, "Where will you spend eternity?" Okay, that sign, it was outside of a church. It is playing on the threat of eternal punishment in hell. So I made a whole video about that. And actually just the other day I was surfing, and there was a man out there on the beach, and he was loudly preaching about the lake of fire and Jesus will send you to hell. And, and there's kids walking by. This is traumatizing. And so I'm a little bit kind of worked up about it right lately. I've been worked up about it. That whole doctrine of eternal torment in hell. It's all celestial metaphor. And I made a video about that. I've made a few videos about that. But it is actually often tied by literalists back to the fall. This is actually a very famous textbook, the first textbook in the Americas when the colonists came over, the
Puritan
colonizing. Yeah, this is called the New England Primer or the New England Primer, however you want to say it. New England Primer. It was actually first written in the 1600s, and it had all these different things in it, vocabulary words, but also like the alphabet. And the alphabet was matched up with rhymes. And so letter A, the very first couplet was in Adam's fall. So A was for Adam. We sinned all. That's what that says. The S, it looks like an F because that's how they used to do the long S. And then B was thy life to mend, this book attend. And C was the cat doth play and after slay. That's what that says. Anyway, but in Adam's fall, we sinned all. That was doctrine that because Adam and Eve took the forbidden fruit, therefore their sin, they hadn't had any children at that point. So their sin comes down to all of us. It's original sin because we were all born in sin because we're born after this happened. So we all have, and so therefore we deserve eternal punishment because of this episode. That's actually doctrine that you can still find today, even in literalist churches. This is from the Southern Baptist Convention webpage where they talk about through the temptation of Satan, man transgressed. This is talking about the Garden of Eden and fell from his original innocence, whereby his posterity inherit a nature and an environment inclined towards sin. Therefore, as soon as they are capable of moral action, they, meaning the posterity, any descendant of Adam and Eve, become transgressors. As soon as they're able to transgress, they start doing it and are under condemnation. So the whole doctrine of hell and eternal torment is actually connected to this interpretation of Adam and Eve. The unrighteous will, this is still from the Southern Baptist Convention, will be consigned to hell, the place of everlasting punishment. So this is actually a very important story to get right. And I would argue that taking it literally gets it completely wrong.
Yeah.
Completely wrong. I'll just throw one more up because I get a little, lately I'm just, I'm really realizing that this is it's still causing trauma to this day because this idea that people are going to hell, that also gets used to say, well, then we have to go make disciples of all nations. In other words, we have to convert everybody to, and it's the duty to seek constantly to win the lost. So this whole,
it's dangerous.
Yeah. I mean, it's for hundreds and hundreds of years, this has been used to, convert at the edge of the sword, people to this literalist story. So so this trauma is still going on. But let me show you where I think this is like, there's so much evidence that I am positive this is the celestial interpretation of this. So here's some stars. We're looking to the south. Can you see my stars? Okay.
Yes.
Great. You see the glorious Milky Way? It's just rising there in the east.
Beautiful.
East is to the left because we're looking south. So everything on this screen is going to rotate from left to right. East, if you're looking north, east will be to your right. But if you're looking south, east will be to your left as it is on the screen, and everything's rotating to the right. So I'm going to bring in the constellational outlines as depicted by H.A. Rey. Oh, did I mention who H.A. Rey? I mentioned that I loved H.A. Rey and his books. Do you know who H.A. Rey is? Do you know what else he and his wife Margaret Rey wrote?
No.
So H.A. Rey and Margaret Rey in the 1940s wrote a book, and then it turned into a whole series of books about a monkey named Curious George.
Oh.
Yeah. So H.A. Rey, and then in 1952, H.A. Rey wrote this book, The Stars, A New Way to See Them. So here's the outlines as H.A. Rey argues they should be outlined. And he never said it, but to my knowledge, he never said it, but this should really be called The Stars, A Very Ancient Way to See Them, because I can show artwork from ancient Greece, and I've done that on a lot of other podcasts. I didn't want to just do it over,
Yeah.
but I could show you some if you want, if we have time. But anyway, here's some outlines. In this set of stars, in this region of the heavens, we can see the events of the Garden of Eden. So I'll start with Eve. So if you take this literally, a lot of this whole dogma gets blamed on Eve. Well, she took the fruit first. And you can read passages in the New Testament. Well, I don't suffer a woman to teach in church because, that's where it all went wrong. No, this is esoteric. This is celestial. This is metaphorical. I listened to, you had a recent interview with Chance. And he was talking about, the feminine principle that's receptive. It's just a fact that in sex, there's different roles, right? Well, esoterically, nature, the physical nature, Mother Earth, we come down into a human body. There's a receptive nature that the pattern, the spirit comes into and forms, or the DNA, causes the body to start to take on these different shapes. That can be metaphorized or allegorized into, a kind of a pattern principle. I think you've even had Santos Bonacci on, right?
Yes.
Santos talks about the word pattern is related to pater, father, like the pattern, the kind of the
code, or the direction.
The code, yeah. And then material, the material form starts to take on the pattern. Material is mater.
Yeah.
So this whole thing is esoteric and it's celestial. It is not, but we mess it all up when we take it literally. I just showed some quotes how it's been taken, I would argue, very, very wrongly, and inverting this whole story is about, we all have all these aspects inside of us, and we all have all this stuff going on. We all are working out this whole story. And it is not to divide up men from women, or people who believe this from people who don't believe this. This is about each and every person. But if you want to see it in the Bible stories, you can see it there. If you want to see it in the Tao, you can see it there. If you want to see it in the stories from the sacred traditions of Africa, you can see it there. If you want to see it in the Norse myths, the Greek myths, it's all telling us the same thing. So let me show you Eve. She's reaching out for the fruit. This is the constellation Virgo.
The Virgin.
Virgo, the Virgin. Yeah. And she has a distinctive outstretched arm. That distinctive outstretched arm is right there. There's a star at the end, and it's a distinctive aspect of her constellation, and it's actually shown in myth or in ancient artwork too. I don't think I have any, but I can pull some up if you're interested.
Yeah.
But this star is called Vinda Meatrix, which means the grape or the fruit picking feminine ending. Yeah, that RIX is actually a feminine end. That's where we get words like actress or dominatrix. Like there's some words that still end in RIX. It turns into RESS in English.
Interesting.
Like, anyway.
Yeah.
But it's a feminine ending for a fruit picking. The star itself has to do with picking fruit. Vin is like a vine, with grapes on it.
Okay.
So you see how she's reaching out to pluck the fruit?
Yeah.
And people may say, well, that's a stretch. I don't believe that that's necessarily Eve just because of an outstretched arm. Okay, that's fine. I'll get some more evidence in a minute. So, here we have, right next to Virgo, a
snake
serpent. That's the constellation Hydra. Of course, Eve didn't act alone. There was an instigator. The serpent was more subtle than any of the other animals that God had made. And the serpent comes along and says, hey, did God really say you can't eat from any of the trees? And she said, oh no, we can eat from any of the trees, just not this one, knowledge of good and evil. if we eat it, we'll die. And the serpent says, no, you won't die. And so the whole story, we're familiar with it. I'll pull up some Bible verses in a minute just to show that this is based on the stars. Adam is a little trickier, but I'm pretty sure this is Adam here. That's the constellation Boötes. There's a few other constellations that could be Boötes, but notice Boötes is right above Virgo. There's some passages that talks about, who's over whom. But it's celestial. It is not literal. This is all celestial. And when they get thrown out of the garden, remember I said that this is all arcing from the left to the right, from the east to the west. In the text of Genesis, God curses the serpent first. Then he pronounces some judgment on the woman. Then he pronounces judgment on the man, in that order. And that's who gets cast out first from heaven, from the sky. As the sky rotates, Hydra is going to sink down out of the sky first, then Virgo, because everything's going left to right in an arc. I could show it to you. I've actually got a planetary map. I could pull it up and show the animation, but let's just keep it here for a minute. And then the man, just like in the passages. Okay, so that's some more evidence. Also, it says, well, let's look at the curse that happens to the serpent first. So the man and the woman, after they eat the fruit, in a few verses earlier in chapter 2, this is in chapter 3, verse 10 that I'm showing up there in the upper left. But in chapter 2, it said the man and the woman were naked and they were unashamed. They were naked and they were unashamed. So they were comfortable in who they were. But then after they eat the fruit, they hear God walking in the cool of the day and they hide. And God says, hey, where are you, man and woman that I created? And the man says, I heard thy voice in the garden and I was afraid because I was naked and I hid myself. And God says, wait a minute. Who told thee that thou wast naked? Something must have happened because you weren't ashamed of being naked before. And now you are. What has happened? The man and the woman are no longer comfortable in even their own bodies, right? It's like this is to me, a clear indication of trauma. You're not comfortable in your own skin, right? You're hiding who you are. You're hiding part of you. And I'm not saying that we should run around naked. This is metaphorical. Right. This is talking about a split from ourself. And the next thing that happens is we get split from one another. Yeah. God says, have you eaten of the tree whereof I commanded thee that thou shouldst not eat? In verse 12, it says, the man said, the woman.
It was her, not me.
Whom thou gavest to me. Not only is he implying that the woman was the problem, but he says, whom thou gavest to be with me. So this is not just her fault. It's partly your fault. Yeah. So this is a split. What's happening is now they're being split, or we're seeing when you're divided from yourself, you're also divided from other people and you're divided from the divine realm. Yeah. And pretty soon you're going to be divided from nature. That's going to happen in these passages too. And so the Lord God turns to the woman and says, what is this that thou hast done? And the woman said, the serpent beguiled me and I did eat. And then comes the curses. So she turns to and says, it's the serpent's fault. And the Lord God says unto the serpent there in verse 14, because thou hast done this, thou art cursed, talking to the serpent, above all cattle, above every beast in the field. Again, I don't take this literally. It doesn't mean we have to go out and kill all serpents, but some people actually do say, well, the Bible says we can kill serpents whenever we find them.
Poor little snakes.
Yeah. Upon thy belly shalt thou go, and dust shalt thou eat all the days of thy life. And actually, as Hydra sinks down, you can see it eating dust. Just look at the way the head is. It actually looks like it's eating the dust when it gets down to the horizon. Yeah. And but here's the very important part that shows this interpretation. In verse 15, I will put enmity between thee and the woman, still speaking to the serpent, and between thy seed and her seed, your offspring and her offspring. Her seed, shall bruise thy head, and thou shalt bruise his heel. So what's going on here? This is where we can see beyond any doubt that this story is celestial. So that part right there, it's a very important passage. Let's see if we can identify the offspring, the seed of the woman in the heavens. So notice, so in the next few verses, God is going to pass judgment on the woman. You know what he says to the woman? What's her punishment going to be?
Painful childbirth, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Pain in childbirth, that travail, it's going to be very painful. And look at Virgo. Does she look like she's going across the sky? She's going across the sky on her back with her legs elevated and,
Yeah.
apart, as if she's giving birth.
Yeah.
Right. In some myths, it's also interpreted as if she's having sex. I mean, the myths usually get like cleaned up for children.
Right.
But then when you encounter them as an adult, you're like, whoa, that's in there. Oh my goodness.
A bit much.
There's a lot of, they're very explicit because they're using these constellations in very, metaphorical ways. And so sometimes Virgo is envisioned as, in the act of having sex, but often she's envisioned in the act of giving birth. And you can see why, if you've ever been at, where someone's giving birth,
Yeah.
they actually have their legs up on the, on those two like foot pedals. Anyway, so who's she giving birth to? Well, there's a constellation right here. You see that constellation?
Yeah.
It's a very big, powerful looking constellation when you see it in the actual night sky. This is the constellation Ophiuchus, which means serpent holder. The serpent holder. See how it looks like a central body holding a serpent?
Yeah.
And also in the New Testament, we have passages like you will be able to handle serpents and they won't harm you. Well, that's probably a reference to this constellation right here. So can you see how Virgo could be envisioned as giving birth to that constellation?
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
because it's
It
right.
Came right out.
Right. And standing above, Ophiuchus is standing above. There's another constellation. It's rising up out of the horizon. We're not seeing the whole, because I had to fit Hydra in. I had to take the screenshot when this other constellation is just rising. But I don't know. This constellation has a beautiful arcing tail that's still down below the horizon. That is the zodiac sign of Scorpio. That's Scorpio. It's a
I see it
big,
now,
dramatic constellation. Now, that's the seed of the woman, Ophiuchus. The seed of the serpent, or the offspring of the serpent, is Scorpio. You see how this?
Yeah, come right out
Now,
of each of them.
what does the passage say? The seed of the woman will bruise your head, but you will bruise his heel. See, the constellation is talking about, this passage in the text is actually describing
this night sky.
The night sky. Ophiuchus is standing on the head of Scorpio, and it looks like he's crushing the heads of Scorpio, the offspring of the serpent. But the offspring of the serpent is biting the heel. See how his pinchers or his mouth is almost right next to the heel?
Yeah.
See right there? It's right there. And this happens, you can see this pattern in the sky. You can see it in the myths. This, to me, is a clincher. No doubt this passage in scripture is talking about this part of the sky.
Yeah.
Because we've got Ophiuchus.
And I wouldn't have any way to understand that passage otherwise anyway. Because I'm like, her seed, your seed heals, and like, what? What's even happening here? But now looking at this, I'm like, well, that makes perfect sense.
Yeah. So literalist Christianity interprets this as, well, they call this the proto-gospel. This is pointing forward towards Jesus will crush Satan, but Satan will wound Jesus on the cross. Jesus will crush Satan by the action of dying on the cross, but dying on the cross is like being bruised
on your
heel.
It's
like a reciprocal, not on the heel exactly, but so that is how it is interpreted.
Okay.
And metaphorically, that's not wrong, because actually Jesus is associated with the constellation Ophiuchus. And if you look closely, you can see the cross in the form of Ophiuchus. I could draw it in there.
Yeah.
Let me see. Let's see if I can you see right?
Yep.
Right there, in between two thieves.
Yeah.
Oh, now I probably have to go through the whole thing, but I won't go through the whole thing to build. I won't build it all out. But here's an ancient Mesopotamian cylinder seal from like 2200 to 2100 BC. You see the distinctive outstretched arm here of the
Yeah.
seated figure next to a tree. It's sometimes called the Adam and Eve seal. Can you see it?
Yeah.
Let me make this a little bigger. See how
Yeah.
extremely distinctive outstretched arm and serpent.
Yeah.
It's basically a pattern that is an Ophiuchus like pattern, two figures around a central tree. But this is the cross right here.
Right.
This is the cross. So it's not wrong to say that this is pointing forward towards the patterns that we see in the New Testament. It's just those patterns in the New Testament are based on the stars too. It's all based on the stars. So I was going to show you how this same pattern plays out in some other to show that this is connected around the world. Now I'll show you the whole Scorpio. Scorpio is right next to this beautiful part of the Milky Way, this very bright galactic core that I was talking about a little bit. This is the full Scorpio. And I usually draw it with multiple heads like that.
Yeah.
In different myths, Scorpio has sometimes 7 heads, sometimes 9 heads, like the Hydra that Hercules fights, the 9-headed Hydra.
Yeah.
But you see that stinger?
Yes.
And so that's Scorpio. And then here's Ophiuchus above, standing on the heads.
Okay.
So we can see that same pattern, the same pattern that we just saw in Genesis. We can see that in stories from ancient India, in the Sanskrit texts of the Vedas, in the Puranas. That's Ophiuchus. I'll show you a couple stories. This is a famous story. In fact, they still reenact this every year in a certain town in India. This is Krishna, the god Krishna, dancing on the heads of this multi-headed Nag.
Oh, yeah.
Or Naga serpent, the Kaliya Nag. You see how he's got multiple heads?
Yeah, I thought it was just like a swirl, but you can see all the little heads in there.
Mm-hmm. Now, Krishna is a very important avatar of Vishnu, the god Vishnu. Krishna plays a flute. You can kind of see he's holding his hands as if he's playing a flute, kind of out to one side, as he's dancing on the heads of the serpent. In this story, you can see like dead fish, and in the river, this Kaliya, this powerful serpent entity, is inhabiting this river. Why is it inhabiting a river? Milky Way.
Ah.
See the Milky Way?
Yeah.
And the Kaliya is so, Kaliya Nag, he's called the Kaliya Nag or the Kaliya Naga. It's spelled Kaliya, Kaliya, that's his name. And then he's a Nag. He's one of these serpent beings that live in the waters. And he's so poisonous that the fish die, and even birds that fly over, they fall down into the river dead. Oh. And so all the villagers are like, our cows can't even drink from the water, they'll die. Something has to be done. And Krishna comes along in the guise of a little, they don't even know that he's a god yet. He just looks like a young man or a boy. And he's like, I'm going to play ball right here next to the river. And then, oops, the ball went into the river. And he climbs up the tree. You see the tree in the background. And he jumps into the river. And all the people are like, don't do that. No. Kaliya Nag is in there. And but they don't know that he's the god Krishna. And so the Kaliya Nag comes up and says, who's jumping into my river? And Krishna says, Kaliya Nag, it's time for you to stop tormenting the people. And he starts dancing on the heads of the Kaliya Nag. And the people are like, what's going on? And maybe this child isn't who we thought he was. Maybe it's a god. And then Krishna assumes like the weight of the whole universe. And then blood starts coming out of the mouths of the heads of the Kaliya Nag because he can't stand the pressure of Krishna. And all the wives of the Kaliya Nag come up and say, please spare his life. Don't kill him. And Krishna says, okay, promise to go somewhere else. Don't bother the people anymore. And Kaliya Nag says, I will, whatever you say. And that story is reenacted every year. You can see Ophiuchus dancing on the heads of Scorpio there.
Yeah.
The multiple heads. And here's one more depiction of it. This is a little bit more recent. This is from the 1800s, but you can see some of the writing down there. Krishna crushing the snake, Kaliya. You can see the wives of Kaliya coming up. In this case, the Kaliya Nag is only depicted with one head, but usually it's multiple heads. But I put this one up because I like the flute. Can you see the flute out to one side? Can you see the flute in Ophiuchus?
Yeah, it's over there.
Right there. He's holding it. So, and he's standing on the head of a multi-headed serpent. These stories, these patterns, this is not, I'm not just seeing this.
No.
This isn't me making this up. This is in the myths around the world. This shows that the stories of the Bible are, and yet literalist Christianity has to go around and say, hey, stop worshiping Krishna. You're worshiping mistaken, stories. We've got the real story. No, they're all based on the exact same pattern. Exactly, same pattern. There's another episode, a different episode. This is Vishnu reclining on the Shesha Nag. The Shesha Naga, sometimes he's called the Adi Naga, the first of the Nag serpents. The first, he's the one that will even be there after the end of the world, this Nag. He has multiple heads. You see the multiple heads. Yeah. You see Vishnu. He's lying there. He's kind of meditating. He's got 4 arms. 2 are behind his head and 2 are by his side. And he's meditating the world into existence as he floats on this ocean on the serpent Shesha Naga or Shesha Nag. And you see there's a lotus flower growing out of his navel in the picture. Can you see that? There's a lotus, and that's the god Brahma being born out of the lotus, which is a different constellation. But you see, Vishnu is actually Ophiuchus as well. That's why Krishna is an avatar of Vishnu. Can you see a lotus growing out of the navel of Ophiuchus?
Oh, yeah.
On the other side from the flute, right there is the lotus growing. See how it looks like it might be coming out of his navel?
Yeah.
But he's reclining on the multi-headed serpent of Scorpio. This is what I'm talking about when I say all the world's myths are based on the stars. I could, show this over and over and over again. Yeah. But if you don't know the constellations, you'll never even make these connections. So, but that's to me very clear evidence that these are not literal, they are profound. I'm not saying that the divine realm doesn't exist. I'm not saying that at all.
Right.
But what I'm saying is this is celestial metaphor. I forget what I have next.
That makes it even more divinely inspired, like literally divinely inspired,
It is just amazing. This is Saint Michael and the dragon. There's a dragon in Revelation 12 that it has 7 heads and 10 crowns. And then Michael, the archangel, cast down the dragon. And when Michael is depicted, this is from I think there's a painting from maybe the late 1400s of Michael slaying the dragon. But he's always depicted standing on the dragon. Why? Because this is another example of the same pattern. See how Michael's standing on the dragon there?
Yes.
And see how he's got a spear?
Yeah.
So Ophiuchus figures often have a spear as their primary weapon because of the way the constellation itself is laid out. And there's another clue in this painting. Michael is often depicted holding, can you see what that is?
Oh, like a scale. Yeah.
The scales of judgment there. Yeah, the balances. There's 2 little figures, human figures in the scales. One scale is actually being pulled down by the devil figure there.
Yeah.
See his hand coming up and pulling him down. Sometimes in other paintings, they'll have an angel lifting up the other one, but he's holding a spear in one hand, and right next to Ophiuchus and Scorpio. I mean, I know you know some things about the zodiac. Right before Scorpio, the sign that's right before Scorpio is Libra, the scales. The balances. See how Ophiuchus could be holding the scales in one hand there?
Yeah.
He's holding the spear in one hand and the scales over there right next to Ophiuchus.
Yeah.
Can you see how that is?
And the people painting this have no idea.
Here's another one. I don't know if it's got passed down. Yeah. I don't know if this got passed down. Like when you depict Michael, you do it this way. I'm not sure they were told this is based on the stars,
Right.
but they might have been told this is the convention. This is from ancient Mesopotamia. This is one of the Apkallu, the divine figures that are carrying those famous handbags.
Those handbags, yeah.
Yeah. See the Apkallu? I would argue this is another Ophiuchus figure. The handbag is Libra, just like, there's all kinds of speculation on what's the handbag. Oh, the handbag is this.
Yeah, yeah.
I am pretty convinced the handbag is Libra. And the Apkallu has a pine cone in one hand. You see the pine cone? I marked A. And the wings, C.
Yeah.
No, Apkallu.
That makes
and
perfect
actually
sense.
I show like example after example of where like an egg shaped, there's ancient figures holding like an egg or a pine cone or these kinds of shapes that are almost certainly, or I would say positively identified with Ophiuchus. We can see it. So I'm trying to show a few kind of connections that I don't maybe show every time. A lot of times I show Hercules, which is the constellation right above Ophiuchus, and people can see some of my other presentations from other podcasts, but I was trying to show a few that are maybe related to the Adam and Eve that I was just talking about, showing the stories in the Bible and the stories, they're related all around the world. This is in the myths of ancient Mesopotamia, ancient Egypt, ancient India, the Americas, the stories of the nations of North America, Central America, South America, the myths of Maui in the Pacific. It's around the world. So there's that quote. I'll just stop sharing. That's enough, that's enough to, I think, show for sure that this is going on.
Agreed. That's definitely incontrovertible proof as far as I'm concerned. And that, going back to that last slide, is the pine cone that he's holding, like I always at least associate it with our pineal gland, and maybe that's what, do you think that's what it was meant to be in the constellation or in?
So Ophiuchus figures are extremely important in ancient myth, and they have to do with reconnecting with self. Remember, I just said a few minutes ago that actually Jesus is an Ophiuchus figure.
Yeah.
Buddha is an Ophiuchus figure. The goddess Inanna of ancient Sumer is an Ophiuchus figure. She goes down into the underworld and she gets hung up on a hook for 3 days. Instead of being crucified on a cross, she gets hung up on a hook. That's the same flute, the flute that I was showing is a big hook. It's like she's being hung up on a hook. So the self gets buried, goes down into the underworld. Osiris is associated. Everybody thinks Osiris is associated with Orion, and Osiris is associated with Orion in some ways. But I also I argue in the Ancient Worldwide System, that's 2019. That's where I go through lots of different cultures, including ancient Egypt, ancient India. I show pretty convincingly that Osiris is also associated with Ophiuchus. So Ophiuchus goes down to the underworld. Jesus goes down to the underworld. The self gets buried, and then we have to recover the self. Okay?
Yeah.
The recovery of self, we have, you always have it. You always have access to self. You always have access to your pineal gland. So I believe that recovery, that ascension. So if we want to talk about what all this means, let me just share my screen just a tiny bit more. Let me jump back to here. Where is it? Come on back. Let me go right here, because I know you are familiar with the zodiac. Here's a zodiac wheel. It's a shorthand way of showing what we were just looking at in the sky. Yeah. It's better to really, in some ways, look at the planetarium and see it. But here's this zodiac wheel is laid out in this fashion. I'm getting to your question of the pineal gland. This whole system is a code. It's esoteric. It's using the parts. It's not just a game of, let's put this constellation here or there. The constellations have special meaning. It's like I used this metaphor recently. If I were to say, hey, let's code everything using the alphabet from A to Z. If I ascribe something to A, or if I ascribe something to Z, that actually has kind of a little bit of connotations in our culture, right? It's like, if I say, Dave, you're going to be Z, I might go, wait a minute. Wait, how come I can't be A?
Yeah.
I want to be A. I don't want to be Z. Z is like last. Z is, Z is the end. I want to be closer to the front. Well, the same thing with the constellations have, the zodiac wheel has meaning in this system. And you're doing an event on the summer solstice, right?
Right.
You've got a summer, or you're doing it right before because you don't want to interfere with Father's Day.
Exactly.
I heard that on one of your podcasts, right? But this wheel, you can see I've written days longer than nights on the upper half, nights longer than days on the lower half.
Yeah.
I made this diagram many, many years ago. The upper half is associated with certain things, like in the Trojan War, Greece versus Troy. The two halves, it's like a battle between the two halves of the year. There's all these big battles in the myths of ancient India. There's the Battle of Kurukshetra. In the Greek myths, there's the Trojan War. In the Norse myths, there's Ragnarok, and the gods versus the Jotuns and all the forces of Jotunheim and Surt, and his flaming demonic horde. And these have to do with actually this, the celestial metaphors have to do with, they ascribe certain connotations based on the cycles. And one of the cycles is the annual cycle. And so at the top of the year, the very longest day, we have the summer solstice. In the age of Aries, which is what I'm depicting here, the age of Aries, the summer solstice fell in between Gemini and Cancer. Now we've moved on because of precession. I don't want to get sidetracked by that, but there's the summer solstice. Down at the shortest day of the year, we have the winter solstice, but halfway in between, we have a crossing point. On the way down, there's a place where days get shorter, but they're still longer than nights, but they're shortening. But then we get to the fall equinox where the sun actually crosses the celestial equator. And after that, days start to be shorter than nights. Now, the equinox is when we cross the celestial equator. It's not exactly equal day and night. Some people say,
Yes.
oh, he doesn't know that.
Thank you. I try to say that too, and no one ever knows what I'm talking about.
Yeah. But anyway, it's roughly equal. That's a crossing over point. That's where we cross over from being days long. We're cross over from being in kind of the upper half of the year, the day half of the year, to being in the lower. Night is starting to dominate. So it's a crossing point. Okay. So that is imbued in this system, or ascribed with meaning, esoteric and metaphorical meaning. And then again, on the way back up, we have another crossing point. This time days are getting longer, and then we cross into the days longer side at the spring equinox, or around the spring equinox, right?
Right.
Well, in the ancient myths, where do you think life, in this life, would be, in this life? And where do you think the realm of death and after we die would be?
Yeah, life is all up on the top in the summer and the happy longer days, and then the death
Happy,
and the
summery life.
Yeah.
And then down there in the cold, dark,
wintry,
wintry. Good guess, but totally wrong.
Really?
Totally wrong. So this is another insight from Alvin Boyd Kuhn, which I agree with him. He argues, and this is one of his most tremendous insights, that the ancient system uses the lower half as this life. This life is the realm of confusion and immersion in matter, material. The upper realm that's the realm of spirit. You're not there right now. You've got spirit buried in flesh.
Yeah.
You've got spirit. Your spirit is entombed in a body. You've been plunged down into a body. So the lower realm, this crossing from the upper half to the lower half happens at the fall equinox. That is indicative of the first birth, the birth into the body, where the spirit plunges into matter. And that happens right around what constellation? Virgo. We just talked about Adam and Eve. They get, right? Eve was associated with Virgo.
Yeah.
And they get thrown out of the garden, out of the upper realm. What's up there? It's like the realm of fire and ether and air. It's the upper elements of air and fire, right? We're not up there. We're down here. Where do the stars plunge down into when the earth turns? I believe in a round earth, by the way. We could talk about that for hours, but earth turns, the stars sink down into the earth. It's like they're plunging down into the lower realms of earth and water. They sink into either the horizon of either land or water, depending on where you are, but the lower elements, and we're put into a body of, what's our body made of in the myths? Clay. Right? Adam was formed out of clay. Prometheus, and the gods formed man out of clay, and then Prometheus brought the divine
spark,
fire, and put it in the clay. So this is, the divine spark. So this is what happens at the fall equinox. Then we plunge down. We're down here. We're going through this lower realm, trying to figure things out. And at the winter solstice, there's a second birth. That's where Artemis, the goddess Artemis, is down there with. She's associated. I have shown some evidence that she's associated with Sagittarius. This is at the very lowest point. We start to turn back upwards, like, oh, now we're heading back up, but it doesn't. It doesn't go in a straight line. We kind of. This is what we're experiencing right now. I call it the spin cycle. It's like you're inside the dryer or in those washing machines at a laundromat. You're just spinning around. That's where we are down here. This is what the myths are depicting. We're trying to get back in touch with self, but when we plunge down, this isn't just about, okay, we're born and then we're down here for a while and then we die. You don't really need myths to tell you that. You can see that, right? This is about, there's part of you that's been buried and suppressed, and you need to find it. And it's not easy. And that part of you that's buried and suppressed is actually connected to the spirit realm. It's like the higher self. It's actually indestructible. That's why it's like a god or a goddess that is slain. It's slain, but it comes back. It doesn't matter how much trauma you've had, that self is indestructible. It's actually still there and available to you. And so actually the path upwards is not along the zodiac, it's along a different path. It's up through Ophiuchus along the Milky Way. And that's, so the path, it's like you don't get there by just, lifting weights. You've got to raise your chakras. You've got to get in touch with whether it's the pineal gland, or you can get back in touch with your higher self. And there's all these ancient disciplines that help you do that. And that's in the myths. If you're doing yoga, or you're doing Wim Hof breathing, or you're doing Tai Chi or some other ancient discipline, martial arts, shamanic drumming, the myths are there to help you. What you're doing, they're giving you metaphors to understand and be able to process and be able to, they're telling you, it's like Mr. Miyagi giving Daniel-san, when you feel it, you'll know. And they're giving you the picture that then the light bulb can go on, oh, now I understand. Oh, that feeling I had when I was doing that Wim Hof discipline, that felt like, that voice that came in that was calm and not panicking while all my other parts were panicking, that might have been my real self actually coming in and saying, we've got this. Hold on, I've got, that's what, and so the myths give us a picture to understand that.
What a genius.
That's what I think is going on.
Yeah. That's such a genius system, your indestructible self is hidden. And I hear people describe this a lot too, when I've described it too, and maybe you've had the same, where as you sort of start to learn all these things and piece them together and awaken a bit, it's like you feel like you've been coming out of this abyss or so, like you've been just like covered in earth and you're slowly sort of emerging and you're like remembering, people say this all the time, like, oh, it's not like I'm learning this, it's like I'm remembering it. And this is all you're describing, all this, and this is what I'm thinking of too, is like we've all been sort of, dead on the cross and gone down to the the dark places, and we're coming back up again and emerging from all of that.
That's what that quotation was trying to say.
Yeah.
And now you understand that. And until you realize what it's really trying to tell you, you're going to think, oh, this is some external thing that I either have to believe or not believe. And I choose not to believe that. Well, you're missing, we've been given, but you're right. It's actually describing something that you already know, or you already have access to. You don't need the myths to get in touch. Some people, you're like, man, that guy or that woman is so grounded in who they are. It's like you know it when you see someone who's really, you're like, why can't I be that way? But sometimes you get little flashes like, oh, I was on that particular wave, I was that way. I really, whoa, where did that surfing come from? I was like surfing above myself. Or where did that song come from that I wrote? You'll hear musicians who are asked, well, where did you get that song? That one just came from the gods. I don't know where it came from. Well, that's what's going on. And like you said, nobody can get in touch with yourself for you, but you have access to self at all times. But the myths are like trying to give you, it's like that Mr. Miyagi breakthrough that has to happen. Like Daniel-san didn't even know he knew it.
Yeah.
And then Mr. Miyagi said, he didn't explain it to him with a bunch of verbiage. He just made him feel it. And the myths it's like, oh, you didn't get it from that myth? Okay, the Jesus myth didn't help you. How about the Samson myth? How about the Solomon myth? Oh, those don't work for you? How about Odysseus? How about the Iliad? How about Krishna and Arjun in the Bhagavad Gita? Oh, that doesn't work for you? Okay, how about this one? How about the Norse myths? It's saying my internet connection's a little unstable. Hopefully I'm coming through.
You've still been coming through, yeah. Your audio or video froze a bit, but we heard everything you said.
Okay, great. That's what I think is going on. So you can, I think, any one myth, all you need is one myth to really show it, and then you have to feel it. But any myth can point you towards this. But the myths, they're trying to tell us this, but they're telling us this in a language. That's the language, this star language, this metaphorical language. And unless we listen to it's a lot easier to hear what they're saying if we're listening to them in the language that they're actually speaking. But what we've had is this misinterpretation going on where someone's saying, oh yeah, I know what they're saying. And they're translating for you. And they're not translating it. They're not translating what it's actually saying.
They're translating just enough to keep you kind of enslaved and not waking up to your true self, which I like that you're saying this is inside of us always, and that we have access to this because we have it in the stars, and that's beautiful and eternal. And we have it in these myths, which are everywhere and universal, but there's these forces that seem to be at work that would like to literally blot out the sky and also maybe take away a lot of our myths and content and our cultures and stuff. So to remember too that it also just exists kind of eternally somewhere inside of you is, I think, really important thing that you said too.
That's well said, Lindsay. And the people who are doing that, the inverters of this ancient treasure that's been given to heal trauma and repair that alienation, are actually turning it on its head and using it to inflict trauma.
Yeah.
You know, when you say when you say to a child, you're in danger of going to hell and being tormented in fire forever and ever and ever nonstop if you don't, do, like, I remember being in Sunday school and being taken out into the hall. I was being disruptive. And I think I was in first grade, and I was told, if you don't cut that out, you're on the road to hell.
That's terrifying.
Like, why you tell a first grader that?
Yeah.
That is trauma inducing. And it's trauma inducing to tell it to adults too.
True.
You go to a culture where, traditional, Taiwan, still to this day, they have their traditional gods. And if you go there and tell people all your traditional received sacred traditions are all false. You're worshiping demons, and you'll go to hell if you keep worshiping this, unless you believe this. Eventually, someone's going to say, well, what about my great great grandfather who's already dead, or my grandmother who I loved and she passed away? Well, they're in hell forever.
Forever.
That's wrong.
Yeah.
That's traumatizing to an adult, right? That's traumatizing to an adult, I would argue. So these things, when they're taken literally, actually are used to divide people up from one another and from themselves, right? Because it's not told, oh, this is a story about getting back in touch with yourself. That's what the Jesus story is actually depicting. Your buried self, your higher self that knows how to put it all back together again. That's what it's about. But if you're told it's external, then you're not going to get the message that it's about recovering yourself. So the Peter Levine quote that I started with, where trauma is the most misunderstood and ignored cause of human suffering, he also goes on to say trauma by definition is a division from, again, I'm quoting loosely, I'm not saying the exact thing, but he says trauma is disconnection from the self, from our family, from others, from nature, and from the universe. So it's like when you're disconnected from yourself, you're disconnected from one another. We saw Adam and Eve, pointing fingers like, no, he did it. No, she did.
Yeah.
You did it. Yeah, the serpent did it. Dividing people from one another, but also divided from nature. Then Adam gets told, you used to be able to just pick fruit from the garden. Now you're going to work by the sweat of your brow, and you'll be disconnected from nature, just like Enkidu, the animals ran away from him. And they're disconnected from the divine realm. They're disconnected from everything. So to repair that, you have to reconnect with self. Then you can start to reconnect with others. But people want to inflict trauma, want to divide us from one another, instead of saying, why is that person hurting so badly that they're, talking to me like that in that insulting way? What happened to her to have that defense mechanism when I said that? Instead of thinking that, it's like, you're wrong, I'm wrong. Don't say I'm wrong, you're wrong. It's the trauma inflictors want to disconnect you from yourself, disconnect people from one another, disconnect people from nature, disconnect people from that shamanic holographic realm, whatever it is that is real, that the myths are also talking about. By the way, the stars are an infinite realm. So what they're doing is they're depicting, we can't see the invisible realm, we can't see this shamanic holographic realm, but we can see the infinite heavens, and they kind of depict for us this infinite realm. So anyway, I don't know if that helped me.
Yeah, no, it's perfect, and it came all the way.
Answer to your great point.
It came full circle too. Well, and then just one more thing that I'll pull out of everything you just said. You're disconnected from yourself, you're disconnected from other people, you're disconnected from nature. But you look at these kind of many modalities people have of healing trauma and coming back into all of that. Well, it's like, go get in touch with yourself, like meditate or be in a quiet space or just sit with yourself, right? Go reconnect with others, like have a friend help you out with this thing and bear the burden with you, or go sit in nature and reconnect with nature and remember like, oh yeah, everything's actually very good out here. Everything's very fine and okay. That's and right. So am I, therefore. And so all of these things are like the way to heal yourself too, again, is to reconnect with all of that.
Absolutely. And surfing or skateboarding. If you watch the movie Dogtown and Z-Boys, have you seen that? It talks about this.
But it's been a while.
The wasteland. Stacy Peralta, I'm pretty sure, was the writer and director, and he's one of the Z-Boys. And Tony Alva is in there, and they talk about this wasteland of like Southern California, like the kind of the austerity and economic austerity that was just kind of descended upon an economic hardship and trauma. And they found surfing and skateboarding. And there's a quotation from Tony Alva who talks about when he's skateboarding. He's one of the greatest skateboarders who ever lived, Tony Alva. He still skates every day. He talks about when you're on your skateboard, it's just you. You're just there with yourself. There's no one else there skating. It's you. And the way he talks about it, he's in touch with himself, with that self that the myths are talking about when he's skateboarding. That I use this quotation from Point Break, but Bodhi says to Keanu Reeves, he says, "You still haven't figured out what surfing's all about, have you?" And he says, "It's that place where you lose yourself and you find yourself." That's the exact quote from the movie. And then he like taps Keanu Reeves right in the pineal gland, or he points right to his third eye and he goes, "And you've got it right there. It's right there." In other words, you've got access to it. You just haven't, you don't know what you're looking for, do you? I mean, there's all these ways that, I think there's infinite ways to recover yourself. And I think the myths are pointing us towards them.
How beautiful. I love that it shows up even in Point Break, especially in Point Break. That's awesome. Well, what would you like to tell people about where to go and connect with you further? Because I'm sure people want to buy like every book you've ever written, which there's a lot. But I also want to ask, while you're giving us all of the links and the places to go and anything that might be coming up that you want people to know about, I also am wondering, do you have a reading list? Because every single thing you mentioned tonight, I'm like, oh, I want to read that.
Thanks. Yeah, it broke up a little on my end. Hopefully my internet connection holds out. I do have a website which has resources. It's got a resources section. I'll just quickly share my screen again to show people my website.
Yes.
Where is it? Thanks for asking. Come back. Website. Here we go. Here, I put this up. My main website is Star Myths of the World, which is starmythworld.com. So you can find on that website, it's got a resources page that has, so at the bottom of every screen, whether you're on a mobile phone or a laptop, you can scroll to the bottom of any screen. You'll find another, it's like the hidden menu at the bottom. It's got a page called resources. Ooh. And resources has a bunch of things like Alvin Boyd Kuhn's 1940 masterpiece called Lost Light. You can read the whole thing online. It's got a link. It's supposed to open right on the screen, and it used to, and now it seems like the people who are controlling archive.com might have changed their code or something a little bit. But anyway, you can still find his whole thing online. So that resources page has things like the Eddas of ancient, the Norse myths. It's got some translations of the Odyssey that are literal, kind of word for word. It's also got my books section, so you can see some sample content from my various books. It's got my videos section where you can see, I was trying to count up how many videos I've done. It's well over 150. They're not all listed in the videos section, but I do have a YouTube channel. That my first book was called Mathisen Corollary, so people can go to that YouTube channel and find, videos, also Instagram over there. But the website will take you to, archives of old podcasts. So if you want to check out, I try and talk about different things on every pod. Like you could never run out of material with ancient myths. There's like, I don't have to worry about, I don't want to talk about this one because I might need to talk about it again. It's like, there's
endless,
but I try and, there's endless. You could write 1 million books and just be barely scratching the surface of the stars and the myths. So, but there's old podcasts you can listen to, ones that haven't been taken down. Some have been taken down for whatever reason by YouTube or whoever takes things down. But there's places that you can find stuff. Stop sharing again.
Perfect.
But yeah, thanks so much for, I do, and it's got a blog that's got over 1,300 entries.
Wow.
So if you don't feel like buying a book, you can read 1,300 blog posts for free.
Yeah.
150 videos for free.
You have plenty of free content,
so that's there
for people to peruse. Well, thank you very much. And do you have any last sort of thoughts or anything you want to throw out there for people before we say goodbye?
Final thoughts for today. Yeah, use sunscreen when you're surfing.
Yeah.
I'm like beet red. I'm very self-conscious of this red color that I turned today.
It seems like you have like a pink light shining on you too, so that's not helping, but you look good to us.
I do. I've got one of those Himalayan salt crystals. Thanks.
That's what it is.
No, I really appreciate what you're doing, Lindsay. Thank you for having me on, because we are living in a time of lies being put out by the media, right? The media is part of the machine that is deliberately inflicting trauma on men and women around the world for nefarious purposes. This is for the purpose of taking away people's inheritance. Like we talked about, the myths are part of our inheritance. Aristotle calls them at one point the ancient treasure. He's talking about the myths and he calls them the ancient treasure somewhere. They are our inheritance given to all men and women in ancient times for our benefit and blessing. I'm convinced that they're not to enslave us. Some people, in the alternative community will sometimes say, well, it's all to enslave your mind and make you work for the Anunnaki. I take that up in my book, Myth and Trauma, where I look at the question, are the myths for beneficial purposes or negative purposes? And I basically say, kind of like Kung Fu, they can be used to bully people and beat people up, but they can also be used to uplift and protect and stop the bad guys and stop the oppressors. But I show evidence that their original purpose is for positive. They're not just neutral. They're supposed to be used for positive purposes, but they're being inverted when they're used for negative purposes. But anyway, they're our inheritance. And the people who are, the small group who are lying to us are doing it for the purpose of stealing the gifts of the gods to men and women everywhere, to humanity. The natural resources are the gifts of the gods. Your gifts and talents that you were given, those are, the ancient myths show those come from the divine realm. And they're given for your benefit and blessing. So that's why I think podcasts and alternative media, I always say yes when someone invites me. If they ask, please just punch.
Yes.
But what you're doing is very important because it's a way of getting the message out that doesn't get out in the controlled media. So it's, I would say words for today, not last ones, I hope, but words for today. Support your alternative media. Support Lindsay. Oh, no, she's over there. Support what these podcasters are doing. They're trying to make a difference in the world. I think it's really important. So thank you for letting me get my message out to more people, and keep doing what you're doing.
Thank you so much. And thank you for reconnecting us to our inheritance. It's a very big job and it's a very important one. So thank you very much for that. And fellow travelers of the path, it is a beautiful thing. This has been your analog electric concentric dose of wisdom according to the mythological master and the star poet, David Mathisen. David, thank you so much for being here tonight. Well, hark. Do you hear the calling? The tinkling, twinkling stars we've wished upon so bright with all of our might have been wishing back at us all along. They've whispered the stories that remind us of who we are, where we are, what we are, and where we are going. We often had forgotten, but they knew we would, and so they established patterns and plans reaching through millennia in order to remind us. We cannot forget, even if we wanted to, because their glory has shown through every culture, every religion, every story, and every aspect of culture and civilization all throughout time. We cannot dislocate anymore. We hear them singing us through our trauma, and we reconnect with what is most deeply true within ourselves. This is how we save ourselves. This is how we save the world. And until you follow the song back to your own heart's center, travel well, aim for balance, and always look inside first. Mwah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Come on. Rat Kings, baby. It's the rap machine. Yeah. Check it. Gray bearded pirate. My motherfucker unknown. Yeah. Come on. In the place I resist the bullshit that they feed us and lead us. This is just a part of the process, man. Just watch this, cause this shit's about to get crazy like a mosh pit. We lost it, toss it, let's start it again. Cause now with technology, with smarter men and women, this is the beginning, not the end. And this is the message of hope that I send. Look on your TV, it's a culture of death. They'll keep on lying to the very last breath. We keep on striving and spreading the truth. It's hard to survive in this world for the youth. The door is closed, the old world is dead. Let's Let's have an age of understanding instead. I'll include you and you include me. Let's see what we can build with some positivity. Let's go. You're moving too slow. Let me see your hands if you know what I know. Come on.
Rap like mummy, ain't no dummy in my rhyming. Started flowing freestyling, now they rhyming loud silence. On with the violence, bodies piling with the gray bearded pirate. On your TV in 4K 3D virtual reality. Casualty of urban warfare. I know but I'm not scared, just prepared and aware. Shining my light through the tunnel of hope. Into the rope, but I'ma give it one more pull. Till the family is full. Take the bull by the horns and lead it to the slaughter. That would be harder and you would be softer. Sometimes I'm a monster, and you forever imposter. With just champagne and lobster. This royalty, the way it was supposed to be. Hopefully the new door opens and the old one closes. With way more focus and growth to mold us. And the truth that they should have told us.
To them screens, it's a plot to drop the IQ. Fighting amongst each other over rulers that don't like you. Prefer us trapped in melancholy with the wood wands of holly. Suggestions that a flicker rate to camouflage the folly. Attempted mental robbery, executed sloppily. The paupers see this mockery and walk the talk with me. Put the hands up to touch the Akasha, cause you know deep down there's something bigger than your wallet. Everyone got a gift, everyone got a light. They want you to forget that ish, cause they can't dim the bright. The positive vibration takes you past the sign shackles. From the sewers and the alleys in the moving castles. Who these assholes really serving with an exposed Achilles surgeon around the corner lurking to prove ascension trumps perversion. Learn them to catch fish and unplug the signal. Show them the simpletons now build the fucking temples.